Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The building was still half asleep when Sophia MBA walked through the back entrance of Dalton Group. At 5:30 a.m., the sun barely kissed the skyline, and the towering glass walls reflected the faintest golden hue of morning. Dressed in her familiar green uniform with her ID badge clipped neatly to her chest, Sophia moved through the quiet halls with practiced silence. She had been working here for 8 months now, long enough to know which doors squeaked, which executives barely noticed her, and which spaces were best cleaned before the clock struck 7. She didn't mind the solitude. In fact, she preferred it. It gave her time to think, to move gently through a world that rarely paused for someone like her. But that morning, something shifted, subtle yet undeniable. Charlotte Ray, the CEO's girlfriend, breezed past the lobby desk and disappeared into Henry Dalton's office unusually early. No greeting, no appointment logged, just a tight grip on her handbag and eyes darting like a woman racing the clock. Sophia noticed, though she kept her head down and didn't flinch. She was good at blending into the background, cleaning smudges while reading people's intentions. Charlotte's heels clicked loudly against the marble, echoing too confidently for someone who claimed to be humble. Sophia paused with her mop bucket just outside the executive corridor. Through the frosted glass, she could make out Charlotte pacing the room. Her silhouette gestured sharply at something unseen. Sophia's brows furrowed. It wasn't her business, she reminded herself. Yet instinct made her linger just a second longer before she quietly rolled her cleaning cart away. It was the first time she ever felt a warning bell around Charlotte, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't say. As she turned into the next hallway, she murmured softly under her breath, "Something's not right." But like so many things Sophia noticed, she tucked it deep into the quiet corners of her mind, just another detail in a job that wasn't supposed to ask questions. The executive lounge on the 11th floor was supposed to be off limits before 7 a.m., but Sophia was often asked to prepare it early for unannounced meetings. That morning, the scent of cinnamon coffee and disinfectant mingled as she carefully scrubbed the glass table beneath the modern chandelier. The walls were lined with sleek paintings, the kind of expensive art no one ever really noticed. As she leaned over to wipe a faint coffee stain from the armrest of a leather chair, a muffled voice drifted from the adjacent corridor. It was Charlotte's, clear and clipped, layered with urgency. "I said I need it done by Thursday. He won't question it, he trusts me blindly." A pause. Then lower, tighter, like someone shielding their voice with a palm. "No, I slipped it in the quarterly expansion file. If he signs without reading the last page, it's done. I just need the timing right." Sophia froze mid-motion, the cloth trembling slightly in her hand. She didn't mean to listen, but the words kept coming, each one cutting like a whisper of danger wrapped in silk. She stood still, the silence between sentences deafening. Whoever Charlotte was speaking to didn't reply loudly, just a few vague affirmations and a short laugh, but the tone chilled Sophia. She moved away slowly, back toward the lounge's doorway, pretending to adjust the mini-fridge. Her heart thudded as the phone call ended and Charlotte's stilettos approached. "Are you still here?" Charlotte asked, her smile thin and rehearsed. Sophia turned, offered a polite bow of her head. "Yes, ma'am, just finishing up." "Well, hurry along," Charlotte muttered, adjusting her blazer. "Some of us have real work to do." The moment passed, but the tension lingered like perfume after a storm. Sophia watched her disappear into the elevator, then sat briefly on the empty sofa. It wasn't just what she overheard, it was the tone. Calculated, confident, dangerous. For the first time in her quiet life at Dalton Group, Sophia felt something rising beneath the surface of routine, a current pulling toward a storm she hadn't invited but could no longer ignore. Henry Dalton arrived at 8:45 a.m., stepping out of his matte black sedan with an unreadable expression, as though the day had already given him too much to process. The staff greeted him as usual, their nods a blend of respect and distance. He walked with the quiet assurance of someone who didn't need to prove he belonged. He simply did. Sophia, now working in the reception hallway, stood by the far corner, polishing the brass trim along the doors. She'd seen him on multiple occasions. But something about his energy that morning felt heavier, like his thoughts were miles ahead of his feet. As he passed her, she instinctively lowered her gaze. "Good morning," he said politely, voice deep and effortless. "Good morning, sir," she responded, her tone steady but soft. Their eyes didn't meet for more than a second, yet it left an impression. This man, despite his title, didn't walk like someone who was truly at peace. Behind those eyes was a loneliness that clung like shadow, unnoticed by everyone else, but somehow piercing to someone like Sophia. Upstairs, Henry headed into his office, removed his blazer, and stood by the wide window overlooking the city. Charlotte was already inside, flipping through documents. "I sent the board the revised proposal," she announced, not bothering with a greeting. "You just need to add your signature where I marked." Henry glanced at her, then at the folder on his desk. "This early?" he asked, mildly surprised. "Efficiency," she replied, walking toward him with a practiced smile. "That's what you hired me for." Henry gave a small nod, rubbing the back of his neck. "Let's go over it after the 10 a.m. call." She pouted briefly, but relented. As she stepped out, Sophia was walking by the open door. Her eyes caught a quick glimpse of the red folder in Charlotte's hands, the same one she remembered seeing earlier on the lounge table. Her chest tightened. It wasn't just a file anymore. It was a quiet signal to stay alert. And although Henry still didn't see her beyond surface greetings, something told her she was beginning to see what even he hadn't. Aura, she carried the elegance of someone born into wealth, but those who paid close attention knew it was a mask worn too tightly. In meetings, she played the devoted partner, looping her hand around Henry's arm, whispering suggestions like harmless nudges. But away from the spotlight, her tone sharpened like a knife. The junior receptionist once said hello twice in a row. Charlotte wrote her up for loitering. She refused to share an elevator with anyone wearing the company uniform and snapped at the cafeteria staff for serving her bottled water that wasn't cold enough. To most, it was frustrating. To Sophia, it was revealing. As she swept the marble floor near the conference wing, she saw Charlotte laugh loudly with the PR director, eyes wide, voice sweet, but as soon as the woman turned, Charlotte's expression dropped into something flat. Cold, controlled, smile while they watch. Then move the pieces. Charlotte once muttered into her phone while passing Sophia without realizing she was nearby. Later that day, Charlotte sauntered into the lower office wing, heels clicking rhythmically, and saw Sophia standing near the utility closet. "You missed a spot," she said, not pointing but expecting compliance. Sophia turned silently, spotted the small patch of dust, and nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "So slow," Charlotte mumbled as she walked off, not waiting for a reply. Sophia didn't flinch, but her eyes followed her, cataloging every word, every inconsistency. It wasn't anger she felt. It was realization. People like Charlotte wore elegance like armor, because underneath there was something to hide, something desperate, and yet no one seemed to question her. No one except maybe Oliver, who always held his gaze a few seconds too long when Charlotte spoke. As the elevator doors closed behind Charlotte, Sophia stared at her own reflection in the brass trim. She looked invisible, yes, but she had the one thing people like Charlotte underestimated: clarity. And she'd soon learn that sometimes it's the quietest ones who see the most. That evening, the building was almost empty by the time Sophia reached the top floor for her final round. The air was cooler up here, quieter, less energy buzzing through the walls. She moved with care, emptying bins, straightening blinds, wiping down surfaces. When she stepped into Henry's office, she paused. The lights were still dimmed from the afternoon, casting long shadows across the room. The scent of citrus cleaning polish lingered faintly in the air. As she approached the desk, her foot gently nudged something on the carpet. A file folder, burgundy, worn slightly at the corners. She bent down slowly. The label read, Q2 expansion plus discretionary transfers, review copy. Her brow furrowed. She looked around. The office door had been left ajar, and Charlotte's floral scarf was still draped over the back of the guest chair. The folder must have been hers. Sophia reached to place it on the desk when the corner popped open and a few pages slid halfway out. She caught a glimpse of numbers, columns, and company letterheads. She didn't read it, just gently tucked it back in. But something inside her stirred. She placed the folder where Henry would surely find it in the morning, aligning it neatly at the center of his desk. As she dusted the final shelf near the window, her mind played out the tiniest details. Why was a confidential financial file unattended in an office where such things were guarded like gold? Why did Charlotte leave in such haste, forgetting her scarf and this file, when she'd been so meticulous earlier? Her instincts scratched at the inside of her thoughts like whispers. But even with her questions, she reminded herself of her place. "Don't get involved, Sophia," she murmured under her breath. "Just do your job." Still, as she turned off the light and stepped out of the office, she found herself glancing over her shoulder, once, twice. It wasn't fear, it was the echo of knowing, the quiet pulse of something out of place. She closed the door gently behind her, but the folder stayed on her mind all the way home. It felt like a secret the office had breathed to her, and she didn't yet know whether it was a burden or a warning. Rain tapped lightly against the window pane in Sophia's small apartment as she changed out of her uniform. The modest room smelled of lavender and soap, her comfort after long hours around power suits and egos. On the corner of her table sat a reusable tote she hadn't noticed earlier. Her eyes widened slightly when she found the folder inside. "How?" she muttered aloud. She must have accidentally dropped it in her tote while picking up her things. Panic gripped her for a second. She hadn't meant to take it. It could cost her the job, but beneath the panic was something deeper, the compulsion to know, to understand what she was suddenly entangled in. With trembling hands, she sat down, flipped the folder open slowly, and scanned the documents inside. The first few pages looked like regular quarterly projections, standard business speak, filled with buzzwords and bar graphs. But further in, she spotted something that made her breath catch. Multiple transactions from Dalton Group to an unfamiliar company. The amounts weren't just large, they were strategic. Repeated, timed. Sophia leaned closer, heart pounding. The recipient account had a name she didn't recognize, Raylan Enterprise Limited, but the signature at the bottom. Her eyes narrowed. She'd seen Henry's real signature plenty of times while dusting plaques or straightening framed recognitions. This one looked close, too close but slightly off. Like someone trying to mimic a rhythm they didn't fully understand. Her chest tightened as she turned the page again and again. The pattern was deliberate, too deliberate. She flipped back to the folder's front cover. Why would Charlotte label it as discretionary transfers? She closed it slowly and leaned back in her chair, pulse still racing. This wasn't a mistake. It was an operation. And Charlotte was moving money through Henry's company to a private outlet, one possibly under her control. Sophia didn't know finance, but she knew deception when she saw it. She wrapped the folder back up, this time more carefully, and placed it back in her tote. Tomorrow, she would return it. But tonight, she slept with a heavy heart and the uneasy truth that something bigger had just landed in her hands, quietly, dangerously, and without her consent. The next morning, the office buzzed as it always did, phones ringing, assistants typing, coffee machines steaming. But Oliver Hart, Dalton Group's chief financial officer, stood by the glass railing overlooking the main floor, coffee in hand, and eyes trained on Henry's office. When Henry arrived, Charlotte was already waiting, all smiles and fast chatter. Oliver watched the way Henry smiled back, genuine maybe, but tired. He took a slow sip. He didn't trust Charlotte. He never had. But Henry was stubborn about people he loved, and love made men overlook the obvious. Later, in the conference room, as they reviewed budget reallocations, Charlotte offered suggestions with unusual assertiveness. "If we move 4% from the expansion budget into PR rebranding," she said, "it'll cover the upcoming media package without hurting projections." Henry nodded, but Oliver's brows rose. "And who proposed the rebranding campaign?" he asked flatly. Charlotte smiled. "Just an idea I'm nurturing privately. It's a strategic pivot." Henry looked at Oliver, then shrugged. "She's got instincts," he said. Oliver nodded, but his face didn't soften. After the meeting, Oliver cornered Henry near the elevators. "You're giving her access to sensitive company files?" Henry leaned against the wall, adjusting his cufflinks. "She helps me review proposals, nothing more." Oliver crossed his arms. "You know how fast things move at the top, Henry. She's not just your girlfriend. She's operating like she's already on the board." Henry exhaled, his patience thin. "I know what I'm doing, Oliver. Do you?" Oliver's voice dropped. "Because I don't like the way she's wrapping everything with pretty phrases and pushing decisions faster than we're used to. She doesn't answer to this company. She only answers to you." Henry stared at him, visibly annoyed. "I appreciate the concern, but you're reading too much into it." "Maybe," Oliver replied, stepping into the elevator. "But just make sure you're reading enough." The doors closed. Across the lobby, Sophia moved quietly with her cart, her eyes briefly meeting Oliver's as he departed. She saw it, the doubt in his expression. Someone else had noticed. And for the first time, she didn't feel alone in what she was starting to uncover. The scent of bergamot lingered in the air as Nora Dalton walked briskly through the main hallway of Dalton Group. Her navy blue pantsuit hugged her frame with quiet authority, and the echo of her low-heeled shoes announced her return to anyone listening. After a 6-month project abroad, she had flown back and unannounced, tired of the vague replies Henry gave in their recent phone calls. She didn't like what she'd been hearing, especially regarding Charlotte. "She's managing what now?" she had muttered on the flight, eyes narrowing at the thought. As she entered Henry's office without knocking, Charlotte stood up too quickly from Henry's chair. "Nora." "What a surprise," Charlotte said, lips tight. Henry looked up from his desk and stood. "Nora, I was going to call." She stepped closer, resting her bag on the conference table. "No need. I prefer truth in person." Charlotte smirked. "You look tired." "Long flight?" Nora didn't respond to the jab. Instead, she turned to Henry. "We need to talk." "Alone." Henry glanced at Charlotte, hesitating. "It's okay," Charlotte said, gathering her things with feigned grace. "Some people take longer to adjust." When the door shut behind her, Nora folded her arms. "You're letting her speak on behalf of this company now?" Henry ran a hand over his face. "She's been helpful, Nora. Insightful, even." "She's manipulative, Henry," Nora said quietly. "And I know you know it." He exhaled, walking toward the window. "You don't see what I see," Nora followed, her voice low. "I see a woman who's consolidating power while you convince yourself it's love. Be careful, Henry. You're one signature away from losing more than just your company." Her words weren't emotional, they were surgical. And they landed where Charlotte's rehearsed charm never could. Outside the office, Sophia swept a distant hallway, unaware that someone had just stepped into her corner of awareness. Word spread quickly through the staff elevators and HR corridors. Charlotte was about to be promoted to strategic director. It hadn't been officially announced, but whispers buzzed with momentum. Some employees feigned excitement. Others rolled their eyes behind cubicle dividers. "She's not even on payroll," muttered Bernard from procurement. "She's his girlfriend, that's all." But Charlotte moved through the building like a queen awaiting coronation. Her stride changed, sharper, more deliberate. She began interrupting meetings, handing out unsolicited advice in departments that had never worked with her. "Have you considered merging digital outreach with executive branding?" she asked one puzzled IT manager. The man blinked. "Ma'am, we fix internal servers." She smiled. "Exactly. That's where brand loyalty starts." Her confidence bordered on arrogance, and the leadership team grew increasingly uneasy. Still, no one challenged her directly, not yet. Sophia overheard bits of these conversations while wiping down the chrome railings on the upper floor. She paused when she heard Charlotte on a call outside the finance wing. "Once I get the official role, the PR firm will come under my budget." "Everything's aligning," she said with a smug hum. "Henry's almost there, just a few more nudges." Sophia kept her head down but her ears open. Later that day, while cleaning the back section of the boardroom, she overheard two junior analysts whispering. "Isn't it strange?" one said. "She came in as a girlfriend, and now she's pushing strategy proposals." "I heard she's replacing Gregory next quarter," the other added. Sophia's grip on the spray bottle tightened. It wasn't envy, it was fear. If Charlotte officially joined the executive suite, the influence she already wielded in the shadows would only grow stronger. The folder she had at home was no longer just suspicious, it was urgent. But even with that knowledge, Sophia still wasn't sure if anyone would believe her. After all, who would listen to a cleaner over a woman whose lipstick left marks on the CEO's coffee mugs? That night, Sophia sat on the edge of her narrow bed, staring at the folder that now felt radioactive. The room was silent but heavy, like it knew what she was holding. Her fingers traced the edge of the cover without opening it. Inside were the same documents, the same names, the same unsettling pattern. But the decision was no longer about discovery, it was about risk. If she returned it, would anyone even believe her? Worse, would they assume she'd tampered with it? Fired on the spot? And if she kept it, could she live with herself if something major went wrong? If Henry signed off on fraudulent deals that dismantled a company built with decades of sweat? Her chest tightened with indecision. She thought about her mother back in Owerri, the rent due at the end of the month, the small box of money she was saving to send home. Everything in her life had been built carefully, quietly. Could she risk it all over a suspicion? The next morning, her eyes burned from barely 2 hours of sleep. She clutched the folder under her sweater and walked slowly to work, her mind circling endlessly. By the time she reached the staff entrance, her heart felt like it would leap out of her chest. As she entered the hallway near the executive elevator, she nearly collided with Oliver. "Whoa, easy there," he said, steadying her arm. "You all right?" She nodded quickly, avoiding his eyes. "Yes, sir, just tired." He gave her a long look, then nodded slowly. "Get some rest when you can. People like you keep this place standing." His words caught her off guard. No one had ever said that to her before, not in this building. She stepped into the janitor's closet and leaned against the door, the folder pressed tight to her chest. Oliver's words lingered. Maybe she wasn't just invisible. Maybe she did have a choice. And maybe, just maybe, the truth wasn't as quiet as she thought. The folder sat between a modest Bible and Sophia's grocery list on her kitchen table. The room smelled faintly of stew and eucalyptus oil, but the atmosphere was heavy with quiet tension. After a long day dodging glances and biting her tongue, Sophia finally opened the folder with slow, deliberate hands. She had avoided reading it in depth, fearful of what it might force her to become, a whistleblower, a witness, maybe even a threat. But now she read each line closely. Her finger traced down the columns of dates and transaction IDs, stopping when the name Raylan Enterprise Limited appeared again. It wasn't just one transfer, it was a trail, a structured pattern, stretching back months, hidden within larger allocations, masked under vague line items like client engagement expansion. Whoever designed it had meant to bury it in plain sight. As she reached the middle of the file, her hand paused. Tucked in a narrow side sleeve, pressed behind a thin divider, was a single sheet of off-white paper, not formatted like the rest, a signature authorization form dated 2 weeks prior. At the bottom, the name Henry Dalton was scribbled in a signature that only looked perfect if you didn't know better. But Sophia had seen Henry's real signature on framed awards, glossy covers, and birthday cards left on the executive desk. This one was wrong. It lacked his usual sharp finish. The H was curved unnaturally, the slope of the D slightly off balance. Her breath caught. The signature had been forged. Her stomach turned. She placed the folder down and pressed her palms against the table, staring at the document like it might vanish. The truth now sat before her, one that wasn't abstract or speculative. If she brought this forward, it would upend everything. Charlotte's face flashed in her mind, so confident, so sure no one would dare speak. But now someone knew. The question clawed at Sophia's mind like a growing fire. Would she stay silent or stop something before it went too far? Sophia sat in the staff cafeteria the next morning, a half-eaten meat pie on her tray, and her thoughts spinning like a fan on high speed. She glanced around at the people laughing over breakfast and casually scrolling on phones, unaware of the scandal quietly folded in her bag. The forged signature haunted her, not because it looked convincing, but because of how subtle the deception had been. Charlotte hadn't used a fake name or illegal channel. She'd cloaked herself in the company's own processes. And the worst part was that Henry hadn't noticed. He'd looked her in the eyes day after day and missed it. Was it love or willful blindness? Sophia thought of her own father, who had once signed over their family's only plot of land after trusting a neighbor's friendly advice. She knew too well that trust, when misplaced, could become the sharpest knife. Later that day, in the executive hallway, Sophia timed her break to pass by the glass conference room where Henry and Charlotte were reviewing a document. Her heart skipped when she saw the familiar burgundy folder on the table again. Charlotte had brought another copy. Their laughter behind the glass felt surreal. It was like watching two people dance inside a burning house, unaware the flames had already touched the curtains. As she turned to leave, she nearly bumped into Nora. "Sophia," Nora said warmly, eyes kind but direct. "How are you finding things upstairs?" Sophia nodded. "Fine, Mom. Just trying to stay out of trouble." Nora smiled faintly. "Trouble tends to find good people anyway." Sophia's eyes lingered a second too long. Nora noticed, but didn't press. That night, as Sophia walked home under flickering street lights, the folder pressed against her back through her bag, she whispered to herself, "If I don't speak, who will?" The weight of that question hung with her long after the city lights faded behind her. Sophia waited until lunch hour when the office was quieter and people trickled out for coffee runs and takeout orders. She found Oliver in the hallway outside the finance suite, holding a thick file and speaking with a junior associate. She waited politely until he finished. "Mr. Hart?" she asked. He looked up, surprised but not annoyed. "Yes." She lowered her voice. "May I ask you something? Privately?" Oliver studied her for a moment, then nodded. They stepped into an empty break room, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. "It's probably nothing," she began cautiously. "But if someone were moving money through personal accounts under the company's name, how would you notice?" Oliver raised a brow. "Depends on how clever they were. Most times we only catch it when the trail's too big to hide." She hesitated, then added, "What if the trail was small but constant, always tucked into routine transfers?" Oliver's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why are you asking me this?" Sophia bit her lip, her hand gripping the edge of the counter. "I think someone's hiding something, and I think it's tied to recent account activity. I saw a file. I wasn't supposed to, but—" Oliver didn't speak for a beat. "And you brought this up to who?" "No one," she replied quickly. "I don't want to cause trouble. I just—" "You think Charlotte has something to do with it?" The name hung in the air like a sudden thunderclap. Sophia blinked. "I didn't say her name." Oliver looked at her steadily. "You didn't have to." He stepped back, running a hand across his beard. "If what you're saying is real, I need to see it. Not guesses, not whispers, evidence." Sophia nodded slowly. "I have something. Just not here." He met her eyes then, really looked. "Then bring it tomorrow. And don't tell anyone else. Not yet." She left the room with her pulse pounding. For the first time, someone had listened. Now, the truth had a chance to speak. Charlotte stood before Henry's desk the next morning, arms folded, a flash drive glinting in her hand like a loaded weapon. Her tone was sweet, but her words carried weight. "I finalized the proposal for the cross-market expansion. You've delayed signing long enough, Henry." He looked up from his laptop, pinching the bridge of his nose. "I just want to make sure we're not missing anything. It's a big step." She leaned closer, placing the flash drive squarely on his desk. "We've already discussed this, twice. Don't let your sister or Oliver make you second-guess progress. I'm not the enemy here." Her smile was forced, and her voice carried that edge she saved for when her charm wasn't working. Henry sighed. "Charlotte, I appreciate your input, but I need to review everything thoroughly. You know how many eyes are on this company." Her eyes narrowed for the briefest second before she turned away. "You trusted me once. I wonder what changed." Sophia, walking past the open door with her cart, froze at the sound of Charlotte's voice, then quickly averted her gaze. She recognized the burgundy folder on Henry's desk, the one she had taken home by accident. But this one looked newer, bulkier. That's when it hit her. Charlotte had likely created duplicate versions, updating them as she adjusted her manipulation. Henry didn't know he was being handed poison in a leather binder. Charlotte's tone lowered again, sultry but urgent. "Look, Henry, this deal affects both of us. Our future. The sooner we close it, the sooner I can take more off your plate. Henry looked at her, eyes tired. Let's revisit this after the board meeting. She stood still for a moment, lips pressed, before turning and walking out. As she passed Sophia in the hallway, her eyes locked on hers. Clean the boardroom windows today. I want them spotless before noon. Her voice was sharp as glass. Sophia nodded, keeping her expression neutral. But inside, she felt the countdown ticking. Charlotte was desperate, and desperation made dangerous people reckless. The boardroom gleamed under the soft white lights, the long table polished to a mirror shine. The leather chairs were arranged perfectly, and a silver tray of water bottles sat in the center. At the far end, Henry, Charlotte, Oliver, and Nora sat with their folders open, laptops humming. It was supposed to be a routine discussion on projected growth strategies, but the air was unusually tense. Charlotte took the lead before anyone could object. I've compiled the final version of the expansion rollout, she said confidently, sliding printed binders toward each executive. All that's needed now is Henry's signature to activate the partnerships and licensing structure. Henry flipped open the binder slowly, scanning its content. Nora raised an eyebrow. When did you complete this? Late last night, Charlotte replied smoothly. I wanted to make sure everything was aligned. Oliver said nothing. His eyes were already fixed on the financial breakdown page, reading faster than anyone else in the room. Sophia quietly entered from the back, pretending to adjust the curtains and freshen the air. She wasn't scheduled to clean there, but she needed to be present. She recognized the formatting, the labeling. It was the same layout she'd studied at home. Her heart raced. Henry's pen hovered above the signature line. Charlotte leaned forward, voice softer now, coaxing. Once you sign, we'll be miles ahead of our competitors. It's the right move, Henry. You know it. Oliver finally looked up. Before we get ahead of ourselves, has this been reviewed by legal? Charlotte answered without hesitation. It's a formality. Everything's within compliance. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she sprayed the window. She watched Henry's expression shift. He was close to signing, closer than she thought he'd be. She turned to leave the room, but her steps slowed. The moment had come. Her eyes flicked from Charlotte's smug smirk to Henry's unsuspecting face. If she left now, the opportunity would be gone. Charlotte would win. And Henry would never know what he signed away. Her fingers tightened around the cloth in her hand. Quiet people aren't always passive, she reminded herself. Sometimes they wait for the precise moment to speak. And hers was nearly here. The pen hovered again, and the room fell into a pregnant pause. Henry's eyes remained on the last page of the proposal, his gaze slowly losing focus, his trust teetering on the edge. Charlotte gently touched his arm. It's just a signature, Henry. You've read everything, haven't you? Her tone was laced with artificial ease, but Sophia, who had paused just outside the doorway again, felt her stomach twist. She turned back. She couldn't walk away. With a breath that nearly cracked her ribs, she stepped forward, her voice steady but low. Excuse me, sir. Heads turned in unison. Oliver raised an eyebrow. Nora tilted her chin, instantly alert. Charlotte's face froze. Henry looked up, slightly puzzled. Sophia? She nodded respectfully, keeping her gaze fixed on the paper he was about to sign. I'm sorry to interrupt, sir, but please check the last page. Her voice cut through the tension like a whistle in fog. Charlotte stood up suddenly, knocking over her water bottle. What is this? She snapped. She's a cleaner, for God's sake. Nora didn't flinch. Then let's hear her out. Oliver silently passed the final page to Henry, his expression unreadable. Sophia's heart was pounding, but she didn't waver. The authorization at the bottom. That signature. It's not yours, sir, she said quietly. Henry blinked, then looked down. The room became silent. Charlotte's hands gripped the back of her chair. Henry's eyes scanned the document, the tension building visibly in his shoulders. The room was no longer a boardroom. It had turned into a courtroom, and Sophia, the one person no one ever noticed, had just become the only voice that mattered. Charlotte's eyes darted to the door, then to Henry. She's lying, she hissed, but Henry didn't respond. Not yet. His eyes were still on that signature, on the page that was never supposed to be read. Time didn't just slow, it fractured. Henry remained silent as he held the final page up, eyes locked on the signature. He didn't speak, but his fingers began to tighten around the paper. Charlotte's once serene expression cracked. "That's your signature," she insisted, voice trembling under the weight of the room's silence. "You signed it in front of me, don't you remember?" Her words bounced off the walls, empty and urgent. Nora folded her arms and tilted her head. "Why does it feel like we're just now discovering what you didn't want us to?" Oliver leaned over and whispered something into Henry's ear, but his gaze remained fixed on the page. "I didn't sign this," Henry said at last, his voice low, stunned and razor-sharp. "This isn't my pen. It's not even my handwriting." Charlotte's breath caught audibly. It must be a mistake, a printing issue, maybe the scanner distorted it. But she was unraveling, her voice too fast, too defensive. Sophia stood quietly at the edge of the room, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, refusing to shrink beneath the heat. Henry slowly placed the page down and looked up, his jaw tightening. "Charlotte, I want the name of the firm that prepared this version." "Henry, wait," she began, stepping toward him, but Nora moved between them. "Don't take another step." Henry reached into his drawer and retrieved a previous contract with his authentic signature, placing it side by side with the one on the table. The difference was undeniable. "I trusted you," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Charlotte didn't respond. Her face was pale now, and her hands fidgeted with the hem of her jacket. In the sharp, chilling silence that followed, a truth neither time nor charm could cover had surfaced, unfiltered and irreversible. Charlotte backed away from the table, eyes darting between the documents like a cornered animal seeking an exit. The room was tense with stillness. No one moved, not even Sophia, who could feel her own heart pounding like it wanted to flee, but her feet held firm. "This is a misunderstanding," Charlotte said, voice unconvincing. "I'll explain everything if we just—" "No," Henry said, cutting through her excuses. He pushed back from the table and stood tall. "I've made enough room for explanations. I gave you access, Charlotte, and you used it to manipulate me and this company." Nora's voice joined his, cold as steel. "And she would have gotten away with it if not for someone brave enough to speak up." Her eyes met Sophia's. The cleaner lowered her gaze, the sudden attention unsettling, but a small flame of pride flickered behind her composure. Charlotte stepped back toward the glass wall. "You're all making a mistake." She snatched the folder off the table, clutching it to her chest. "I never needed this company anyway." Her voice broke on the last word, pride crumbling into desperation. Oliver slowly approached the doorway, his voice calm but firm. "Put it down and explain it properly," but Charlotte was already moving. She turned and sprinted out the door, heels clattering against the marble. The security intercom lit up as Oliver barked, "Block the main exits." Sophia followed, stunned as Henry rushed out after them. In the hallway, Charlotte shoved past a junior staffer, disappearing around the corner like a shadow with unfinished business. Henry stopped short near the reception, looking down the stairwell where she had vanished. "She's gone," he muttered. "No car keys, no purse, just panic." Sophia stood near the boardroom entrance, watching the storm fade into the corridor. But she knew it wasn't over. The truth had cracked the surface, but what lay beneath still had to be faced. And Charlotte, even in retreat, had just changed the course of every life in that building. The atmosphere inside Dalton Group was eerily still, despite the fact that everyone could sense something explosive had just occurred. Word hadn't reached the general staff yet, but the energy had shifted, like the building itself had inhaled and didn't know how to exhale. Henry returned to his office with Oliver and Nora in tow. Security confirmed that Charlotte had fled the building on foot, ditching her purse in the side stairwell. "We've alerted the police," Oliver said as he dropped the folder on Henry's desk. "But since no money has been officially reported missing yet, they can't arrest her. Not today." Nora sat on the edge of the conference table, her arms crossed. "She'll slip up. She's too arrogant not to." Henry didn't respond right away. He was staring at a framed photo on his shelf, the company's 10th anniversary celebration, where Charlotte stood beside him, hand in his. How did he not see it? Outside the office, Sophia stood quietly in the hallway. Nora walked out and gestured for her to come in. "You deserve to be here." Sophia hesitated. "Ma'am, I really just wanted to stop him from signing something dangerous. That's all. Henry turned from the window, his eyes searching hers. And you did, more than you know. There was a long pause. Why didn't you come to me sooner? He asked softly. Because I thought no one would believe me, Sophia replied. I'm just the cleaner. Henry shook his head, the guilt creeping in like a tide. Not anymore. Oliver stepped forward and nodded to her. You saved this company from a nightmare. That's not invisible work. That's leadership. Sophia swallowed hard, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. She wasn't used to being seen, not like this. And while Charlotte had disappeared into the world outside, leaving chaos in her wake, Sophia remained rooted, quiet, but stronger than anyone expected. For now there was no arrest, but justice had begun its slow, patient march. The board meeting reconvened the next day, but the mood was anything but orderly. Every department head was summoned, not for agenda updates, but to explain how Charlotte had gained so much access without a formal role. The older executives whispered with tight brows and crossed arms, unsure of how to navigate the embarrassment of being deceived. Henry stood at the head of the table, stoic but evidently worn. There's no use pretending we weren't all part of this, he began, glancing around the room. We made it easy for someone to slip through the cracks because we assumed credentials were proof of character. The murmurs fell silent. Then came the inevitable question, directed not at Henry, but at the quiet woman seated at the far end of the table. And how did the cleaner find out? Asked Mr. Lawson, head of compliance, tilting his glasses. Why was she even looking at financial documents? Sophia sat up straighter, though her voice was calm. I didn't go looking for anything, sir. The folder was left behind. I thought it belonged to Mr. Dalton, so I picked it up. A few exchanged skeptical glances. And you just knew the signature was forged? Another asked. No, she replied softly. I noticed details that didn't sit right. Then I confirmed it by comparing his real one. Silence again. Oliver finally leaned forward. We're lucky she did. We were steps away from endorsing fraud, and everyone here knows it. Nora, seated beside Henry, added sharply, if anything, we should be asking why someone outside the boardroom saw what none of us did. The tension slowly shifted. Some nodded in reluctant agreement. Sophia didn't gloat. She just lowered her gaze and let the room carry its own shame. Henry watched her quietly. She had been under their noses all this time, not speaking to be heard, but acting when it mattered most. And it was becoming clear she hadn't just changed the course of a meeting, she'd changed the company's trajectory entirely. That evening, after most of the staff had gone home, and the building was reduced to hushed footsteps and flickering lights, Henry called Sophia into his office. She stepped in hesitantly, her palms slightly damp, unsure what this encounter would hold. The air between them wasn't tense, but charged with something unfamiliar. Henry closed his laptop and gestured toward the seat across from him. I wanted to speak to you without an audience. She nodded, easing into the chair with measured poise. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. I owe you more than an apology. You didn't just protect this company. You protected me from a very stupid mistake. Sophia met his eyes briefly, then looked down. I wasn't trying to expose anyone, sir. I just couldn't watch you sign something you hadn't seen fully. Henry gave a short, rueful laugh. You trusted your instincts more than I did mine. That says a lot. A pause. I've been so wrapped in trying to keep the business stable and my personal life intact that I stopped questioning the people closest to me. Sophia didn't respond at first. Then quietly, it's hard to see clearly when someone is telling you what you want to hear. The weight of her words hung in the space between them. Henry exhaled and leaned back. What do you want, Sophia? I mean truly. After this? She hesitated, then said, I want to work in a space where what I see matters, where people don't look past me. He nodded slowly. That's fair. Then it's going to change, starting now. Their eyes met again, and for a long second, the office no longer felt like a CEO's domain. It felt like a place where something unspoken passed between two people who, in different worlds, found meaning in each other's truth. Nothing romantic, not yet, but undeniably human. And that was the beginning of something both of them hadn't expected. The next morning, Nora knocked gently on Henry's office door, not waiting for permission before stepping in. She walked with confidence, but held a mischievous glint in her eyes. "You've been brooding," she said plainly, taking the seat across from him. "And before you protest, I know what brooding looks like. I used to do it in law school whenever I fell for someone inconvenient." Henry looked up, startled. "I'm not brooding," Nora tilted her head. "You're quieter than usual. You've stopped correcting Oliver's math jokes. And you watched that girl walk down the hall like she was carrying your oxygen." He rolled his eyes, but didn't argue. "Sophia did something extraordinary," he admitted. "She stood up when she had everything to lose." It stays with me," Nora smiled gently. "I know, which is why I'm here." "Don't do this," Henry warned, already knowing what was coming. But Nora pressed on. "You've spent years surrounded by people who only speak when they want something. That girl didn't ask for credit, applause, or even protection. She told you the truth and expected nothing back. People like that, they're rare." Henry ran a hand through his hair. "She's not looking for that, and I'm not even sure what I'm feeling." Nora stood, her tone softening. "I'm not asking you to rush toward anything, but I am asking you not to run away from it either." As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Some people walk quietly. Doesn't mean they aren't walking toward you." Henry was left staring at the empty chair across from him, the echo of his sister's words deepening something already stirring inside. Maybe it wasn't love. Maybe it was just recognition. And maybe, for once, that was enough to matter. The early morning sun hadn't fully risen when Henry's call to the legal team was made. He stood in the glass atrium of his office with a voice as cold as the skyline behind him. "I want a full audit done on Raylan Enterprise and any vendor that matches their registration pattern," he instructed firmly. "Also flag any indirect transfers tied to discretionary expense codes in the last 9 months. On the other end, the head of legal, Mr. Kingsley, responded, "Already underway, sir. We've also engaged a private investigation firm." She used a burner phone and fake ID to book her last ride out of the city. Henry clenched his jaw. Charlotte's exit wasn't just sloppy. It was brazen. She hadn't gone quietly. She had mocked him with her silence. And that wounded more than the betrayal. It insulted his intelligence. Meanwhile, Sophia entered the building like any other day, only now, security offered her a warm smile instead of a dismissive nod. A few employees who had once overlooked her entirely gave her brief nods of acknowledgement, nothing dramatic, but noticeable. Inside the break room, she overheard 2 analysts speaking in hushed tones. "They say she was never officially on staff," one said. "How'd she even access accounts?" the other whispered. Sophia sat quietly in a corner, sipping tea, pretending not to hear, but her thoughts remained elsewhere. As she cleaned the HR wing later, she passed by a whiteboard with a new marker line. Red notice, Raylan Enterprise under investigation. She paused. It was real now. Charlotte wasn't just a manipulator, she was a fugitive. A chill moved through her, but so did clarity. The company had finally turned its eyes in the right direction. Still, she knew that until Charlotte was found, none of them could fully exhale. The silence she left behind was more dangerous than her presence had ever been. That afternoon, Oliver approached Sophia while she was arranging supplies in the back storage room near the accounting floor. He tapped gently on the doorframe before stepping in. "Mind if I interrupt?" She turned, surprised. "Not at all, sir." He leaned against the wall, arms folded, but his tone was uncharacteristically soft. "I've been thinking about that first week you joined. I didn't pay much attention then. Thought I knew what roles mattered most in this place." Sophia smiled politely but didn't reply. "I was wrong," he said, voice heavier now. "You saw what I didn't, what none of us did. I should have listened sooner, when you first hinted something felt off." She shook her head. "I didn't come to you directly, remember? I was too afraid." Oliver chuckled faintly. "And yet, you still ended up saving our necks." There was a pause before he continued. "Listen, I've spoken to Henry about something. Not as a favor, just as something overdue. I want to personally offer to mentor you if you're ever interested in administration or compliance roles. You've got the instinct, and we could use more eyes like yours on the right side of the glass." Sophia stared at him, stunned. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now," he said, standing upright. "Just think about it. You're not just good at noticing things, Sophia. You know when to act, and that matters. He started walking away, then turned at the door. Oh, and don't worry about your job title. That's about to change anyway. She stood there for a long moment after he left, blinking against the light. In the space where brooms once hung and mops once dried, someone had just offered her a path. And not as a reward, but as recognition. That difference meant everything. By the following week, whispers became confirmations. A formal HR memo went out across the company. Effective immediately, Ms. Sophia MBA has been reassigned as executive assistant to the office of the CEO. Sophia stared at the email twice, then a third time, rereading her name as if it didn't belong. When Henry called her into his office that morning, she stepped in nervously, her old ID badge still clipped to her hip. He smiled gently. Time to update that badge. She blinked. You're serious? Completely, he replied. You've already proven you can spot what even the most experienced missed. I need that kind of clarity around me, formally. She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never worked in a position like this. What if I mess up? Henry leaned forward. Then you learn, and you don't have to do it alone. Her new office space was adjacent to his, small but sunlit, with clean shelves and a simple desk already organized with supplies. The staff from facilities even left a welcome card signed by a few employees, one reading, You were our eyes when we didn't know we were blind. The weight of those words clung to her chest as she sat down and took in her surroundings. She placed a framed photo of her mother on the desk, a reminder of where she came from. As she looked through her onboarding packet, Henry knocked once before walking in. We have a leadership dinner next Friday. I'd like you to attend. As a guest? She asked, surprised. No, he said with a soft smile, as part of the leadership. For the first time in a long while, she felt not only seen, but welcomed. The cleaner who once walked unseen through polished halls now had a nameplate beside the CEO's. And the woman who once questioned her voice had now become the one others leaned in to hear. The rhythm of Sophia's new position settled in slowly, like morning light creeping through blinds. She learned quickly, organizing Henry's calendar, attending project meetings, drafting follow-up emails, all tasks she had seen from a distance, now resting directly in her hands. What surprised her wasn't the difficulty of the job, but how natural it felt. The silence she once carried like armor had transformed into attentive presence. Henry often paused after meetings to ask her input. What did you think of the proposal? He asked one afternoon as they walked toward the elevator. Too many buzzwords, she replied quietly, then added, It sounded more like a performance than a plan. Henry chuckled. I thought the same. But it's good to hear it from someone who doesn't need to impress anyone. They shared a smile, brief but sincere. What remained unspoken between them was growing heavier with each passing day. The long glances, the ease in their conversations, the quiet understanding, they were now threads that connected more than just work. Yet neither dared cross the line. Sophia often stayed late, not out of obligation, but because the office felt less like a place and more like a page still turning. One evening, while sorting end-of-month reports, Henry leaned against her doorway. Do you regret it? He asked softly. She looked up. Regret what? Speaking up. All of it. She paused. No, but I sometimes wonder if I changed too much to go back to who I was. He nodded thoughtfully. You didn't change. You grew into what you were always capable of. His words lingered long after he left. For the first time in years, she wasn't surviving, she was becoming. Not through anyone's permission, but through her own decision to be visible in a world that preferred her invisible. Friday evening fell softly over the city, casting golden hues over the Dalton Group parking lot. Sophia emerged from the building later than planned, her bag slung over her shoulder and her thoughts still tangled in budget reviews. As she stepped toward the bus stop, a familiar voice called from behind. Let me give you a ride, Henry said, already unlocking his car. She paused, surprised but not uncomfortable. You don't have to, she said. He smiled, leaning on the passenger door. I know, but I want to. She hesitated only a moment before walking over. The drive was quiet, but not awkward. The silence between them had a different tone now, full, not empty. At a red light, he glanced at her and asked, How are you really doing with everything? honestly. Sophia looked out the window, then answered, "It's strange. I spent so long wanting to be seen. And now that I am, it scares me sometimes." He nodded. "It's not easy being at the center when you were always meant to work in the shadows." Her eyes turned to him. "Maybe I was never meant to stay in the shadows. I just got used to them." That line made something shift in Henry's expression, respect, admiration, and something softer all flickered there. When they reached her bus stop, she opened the door slowly. "Thank you for the ride." "Sophia," he started, then stopped. She waited, but he only smiled. "Take care." She nodded, stepping into the quiet streetlight. Their hands had brushed slightly as she reached for the door, just enough to jolt something unspoken into the air. As the car pulled away, she watched the taillights disappear down the road, the hum of possibility echoing louder than the engine itself. She didn't know what they were becoming, but she knew it was no longer just about gratitude. Something else had begun, quietly, respectfully, and without definition. The call came in just after noon. Henry was reviewing internal memos when his phone buzzed with a direct line from the security liaison. "We have something," the voice said crisply. Interpol flagged her boarding a private shuttle in Casablanca. She used another alias, but the facial match was confirmed by AI tracking. "She's moving through borderless countries. Slippery, but not invisible." Henry thanked them, his tone unreadable, then stood in silence for a long moment. The blinds behind him swayed gently with the air conditioning, but his focus was elsewhere. He walked to Sophia's desk outside his office, holding the phone like it weighed more than it should. "They found her trail," he said softly. She looked up, instantly alert. "Where is she headed?" "Somewhere far," he replied, "but not far enough to escape what's coming." Later that afternoon, he and Oliver reviewed the update in the strategy room. Oliver glanced over the satellite pings and passport fakes. "She's working with someone," he muttered. "No way she's managing all this alone. We need to figure out who's helping her." Henry nodded. "And we will, but we won't make this personal. We'll do it right." Outside the glass walls, Sophia reviewed reports as if the news hadn't rattled her. But deep down, she knew Charlotte wasn't just running, she was plotting. And unfinished stories tend to circle back. That evening, as she packed her things, she caught her reflection in the elevator mirror. Gone was the quiet girl scrubbing corners. In her place stood a woman preparing for whatever storm might return, and she didn't intend to face it in fear. Charlotte may have vanished, but the consequences of her actions still echoed in the halls she once walked. Sophia knew the difference now. She wasn't waiting to be protected. She was prepared to protect. Henry sat alone in his office as dusk settled over the city skyline, the orange hue casting long shadows across the floor. A blank message draft glowed on his laptop screen to Sophia MBA. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, hesitant. He had written the message in his head a dozen times. "Thank you for everything, for your courage, for your honesty, for making me look beyond what I thought I needed." But as his cursor blinked, so did his doubt. Would sending it cross a line? Would it complicate the calm they had just earned? He reached instead for his pen and scribbled it out by hand, thinking maybe it would feel more real that way. But even then, the words stopped halfway through. He tore the note gently and let the pieces fall into the drawer, his feelings folded away like unfinished chapters he wasn't brave enough to publish. At the same time, Sophia sat at her modest dining table, her phone screen lit with Henry's contact open and unsent text beneath it. "I'm grateful, but sometimes I don't know what to do with this kind of attention." She stared at it, fingers trembling slightly. Her new role brought confidence, yes, but vulnerability still lingered in the spaces where admiration looked too much like affection. What if she misunderstood his kindness? What if she mistook gratitude for something deeper? With a long breath, she deleted the message and placed her phone down. Instead, she wrote in her journal, the one she kept hidden behind her wardrobe. "Some silences aren't empty. They are choices, and today I chose mine." Across the city, two people who had walked through betrayal, ambition, and courage now stood on the edge of something quietly beautiful, yet neither moved. Not out of fear, but out of respect for the distance that had made them who they were. The annual Dalton Group Award dinner was held in a grand ballroom glowing with warm chandeliers and the quiet hum of jazz. Executives mingled with investors, waiters floated through the crowd, and a slideshow of the year's milestones played on a looping screen. At the far end of the hall, Sophia stood by the drinks table in a simple navy gown, her hair twisted into a soft updo. She felt out of place at first, until someone tapped her shoulder gently. "You belong here," Henry said with a smile. "You've earned your seat." She smiled shyly. "I'm still adjusting." He offered his arm. "Then let's adjust together." They walked through the room side by side, not as employer and assistant, but as two people who had walked through fire and come out with ash-dusted dignity. When it came time for closing remarks, Henry took the stage with ease. But his speech was different this time, not rehearsed, not flashy, just honest. "This year taught us that strength doesn't always speak the loudest," he began. "Sometimes it's found in the quiet courage of those we least expect. People who choose truth when it would be easier to turn away. Tonight, I want to honor one such person, not for a title, but for her integrity." His eyes found Sophia across the room. She reminded us that integrity is still the most valuable thing a person can bring into any room. The applause began soft, then grew. Sophia stood frozen, her eyes burning slightly, heart thudding against her ribs. She didn't step forward. She didn't need to. That moment was enough. As the evening wore on, she and Henry talked again under the glow of low-hung lights, about leadership, about life, about beginnings that often come disguised as endings. And though they still hadn't spoken of anything personal, their closeness spoke volumes. The woman who once scrubbed floors now stood on them with poise, and the man who once overlooked her now looked nowhere else. The page had turned, not with noise, but with meaning. And in that quiet, a new chapter had already begun. Here's the Bible verse, Luke 12, verses 2-3. "There is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. What you have said in the dark will be heard in the daylight, and what you have whispered in the ear in the inner rooms will be proclaimed from the rooftops." This verse reflects how deception, no matter how carefully planned, is ultimately exposed. It honors Sophia's courage to bring truth to light and reminds us that justice has a divine way of finding its voice, even through the quietest among us. Moral of the story: true strength doesn't always come from power, position, or loud voices. Sometimes it comes from the courage to do what's right, even when no one is watching, even when you are underestimated. Sophia's journey teaches us that integrity will always outlast manipulation, and that the quietest person in the room may be the one who saves it. This story reminds us never to dismiss anyone based on their title, and never to underestimate the weight of a single honest voice in a room full of